Here are 101 facts about Mazda, the most OCD brand out there. You'll get what I mean in a bit. Number 1. You know how turn signals turn on and off? Well, apparently, Mazda hated that because they thought regular turn signals blinked too aggressively and made people feel tense. So their lamp development leader, Atsushi Yoshida, spent 2 years developing calmer and friendlier turn signals by studying electrocardiograms to figure out how a human heartbeat rose and faded. And after a lot of trial and error, he managed to come up with a perfect lighting pattern by having the LEDs come on instantly and then fade in 0.01 second increments. Just to be clear, this man studied a beating heart to fix a blinker. Number 2. Now here's something you can't unsee. All the letters in Mazda's corporate mark are lowercase, except for the D. That's what she said. And no, that's not a typo. Mazda did that intentionally, because if the D was also in lowercase, its top would pop up and ruin the symmetry. Now why didn't they just make them all uppercase? That I do not know. Number 3. Mazda specifically designs their seats to make you uncomfortable. I know, I'll explain. A couple of years ago, Mazda started researching human spines by monitoring people as they ran and walked to see in which position their bodies reacted faster to danger. And they figured out that while sitting, humans could only react fast if they were sitting upright. So, they decided to design their seats and interior space to make you sit upright by making sure you're really uncomfortable when you slouch. Meaning basically, Mazda found the most passive-aggressive way possible to fix your posture. Number 4. Mazda was originally called Toyo Cork Kogyo, and they started out as a cork manufacturer in Hiroshima, Japan in 1920. At first, business was okay. They were selling a decent amount of cork and making a little bit of profit. But over time, sales started to dwindle, and they struggled to stay afloat. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get any worse, a fire erupted in 1925, destroying most of their factory. But instead of rebuilding the same company, their president, Jujiro Matsuda, an ex-blacksmith turned engineer, pivoted towards machine tools and industrial equipment. You know, something a little less flammable than cork. Anyways, that move ended up being way more successful, and they dropped cork from the name in 1927 to become Toyo Kogyo, with them making their first vehicle 4 years later and officially adopting the name Mazda in 1984. Number 5. As of February 2026, Mazda is officially the safest brand in the world. And yes, that means they're safer than Volvo. Number 6. If a Mazda and let's say a Nissan have the same amount of road noise inside, the Mazda will actually feel quieter, even though they're at the same decibel level. Now I know that sounds like magic, but it's not. It's just Mazda being Mazda. You see, most brands try to make their cars quiet by throwing sound deadening everywhere and calling it a day. But Mazda figured out that your ears don't actually care about how loud things are, they care about how suddenly things get loud. Meaning a gradual increase in road noise is way less annoying than a sudden spike, even if they hit the same volume. So instead of just trying to be the quietest, they engineered their cars so that noise enters the cabin smoothly and on its tippy toes, by redesigning the frame and sealing up tiny gaps. Basically, Mazda made the noise knock before it entered. Number 7. In 1972, Mazda started importing their adorable B-Series pickups to the US, with the hopes of it becoming as popular as it was back in Japan. But that didn't happen. Not because they weren't good or reliable, but because they were simply too expensive. Why did Mazda make them too expensive? They actually didn't. America did. Because years prior in 1964, the US imposed the chicken tax, a 25% tax on imported light trucks. Now things looked bleak for Mazda, and it seemed like they would have to pull out of the market. That's until someone said, "Wait, Daddy, I have an idea. We can import them as cars by not installing the bed, and then we can hire some guys to install them at the dealerships." So, Mazda said, "Sure, let's try it." And they proceeded to do just that for 8 years straight, slashing prices from $2,500 to $2,000, until the loophole was later closed by the government in 1980. Number 8. The Miata only exists because a journalist was too passionate about British roadsters. Let me explain. In the late 70s, a young American journalist named Bob Hall was invited to Mazda's headquarters to meet with Kenichi Yamamoto, Mazda's head of research and development. And during their meeting, Yamamoto asked a very simple question: what car should we build next? And Bob, who was fluent in Japanese, immediately grabbed a chalkboard and started sketching out his dream car, a lightweight, rear-wheel drive, open-top roadster, like the old British sports cars, but one that actually starts in the morning. When Bob was finished, Yamamoto stared at the drawing, said nothing, took a picture, and just ended the meeting. And Bob went about his life thinking, well, that was fun, but they're never gonna do it. A couple of years later, in 1981, Mazda calls Bob and offers him a job, not in PR like he expected, but in the design department out in California. Cool, right? Except they didn't have him working on any sports car. They had him designing the B-Series pickup truck. Until one day in early 1982, he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned around, and standing right there was Yamamoto. And he goes, "Bob, what are you working on?" And Bob says, "The pickup truck." And Yamamoto goes, "Yeah, forget about that. You should be working on your lightweight sports car." So obviously, Bob said hell yes and got right on it. But it wasn't as easy as you might think. In fact, Bob had to fight tooth and nail to protect his car, since most of the people at the company didn't believe it would sell, and it divided the company into 3 groups with 3 core ideas. The first group wanted to make it front-wheel drive to be safer. The second wanted to make it mid-engine to be more exotic, and the third was Bob with his fun, rear-wheel drive, front-engine simple roadster. Anyways, after a lot of sparring sessions with people in suits, Bob managed to come out victorious, and the MX-5 finally went into production, a decade after a company asked a simple question at the right time to the right guy. Number 9. Mazda hired a psychology professor to design emotional switches. I know it sounds confusing, but hear me out. In 2014, Mazda decided to bring in Kenta Kubo, a psychology professor at Nagoya University, Japan, to teach their engineers to design for emotion. And just like you, the engineers were confused. So he decided to show them what he meant by building a prototype switch that felt active and animated rather than clicky and soulless, which kinda got through to them, but not quite. So he just kept teaching them. And after a year and a half of lessons, the engineers finally understood what he meant when he said, cars don't just need to work right, they need to feel right as well. As a result, Mazda has been feeling right ever since. Number 10. If Mazda hadn't bet on the rotary, it wouldn't exist today. Because back in the 60s, Japan wanted to consolidate their automakers, which basically meant they didn't want too many cooks in the kitchen. And they were going to take out the small ones, so they'd only have 2 to 3 automakers to represent their country. And since Mazda was small at that time, they were definitely on the chopping block. Now around that same time, a little German company by the name of NSU announced their brand new Dorito-shaped engine called the Wankel engine, which was named after its inventor, Felix Wankel. Immediately, Mazda, GM, Rolls-Royce, Mercedes, and Citroën knocked on their door to license it. But there was an issue. The engine kept tearing itself apart. The apex seals, which are these little strips at the tips of the Dorito spinning part that seal the combustion chamber, kept failing, gouging up the inside of the engine and leaving what engineers called the devil's nails. So one by one, every company that licensed it eventually gave up. But Mazda surprisingly stayed, and they decided to go balls to the wall on the rotary train and bet everything they have on the engine. Because as they said, they needed a technology no one else had. So, they assembled a secret elite engineering team ran by Dr. Kenichi Yamamoto called the 47 Ronin, which meant the 47 Warriors. And as the name suggests, the 47 super smart engineers went to war, working on the engine day and night. And fun fact, on day 1, the engine blew up and sent metal shards across the room. Anyways, armed with the motto, "We will not be defeated by this engine," and after blowing up around 200 more engines, I'm not joking by the way, the 47 Ronin developed a carbon aluminum apex seal that could survive long-term use without destroying the engine from the inside. The engine sounded amazing. It loved being revved for long periods of time, and it made really good power, saving Mazda and helping them establish themselves around the world. because they managed to achieve something no one else could. Number 11. Mazda's first rotary, the Cosmo, came with a little flap under the steering wheel, so you could warm your feet up using the hot air from the engine bay. Number 12. Mazda had to redesign the Mazda 3 because it looked too perfect. You see, when Mazda was designing the 2019 Mazda 3, they had their master craftsman, called Takumi, sculpt its clay model entirely by hand, and the result was a breathtakingly beautiful little car. So, they had their guys scan the model to make an actual metal prototype. Later, when the car was done, they showed it to their chief designer Yasutake Tsuchida, who almost had a heart attack when he saw it, because it looked nothing like the clay model he fell in love with, and he described it as soulless. So he told his guys to go back to the clay model to investigate, and that's when they realized their mistake. The computer they used to scan the model treated the slight warps, subtle surface variations, and little imperfections as mistakes, not knowing that the different reflections and textures that were put in intentionally were what gave the car its soul. So for a year and a half, that's 18 months, Mazda's team went back and forth between the clay model and the digital files, comparing every single surface, identifying every spot where the computer had corrected the human touch, and then manually recreating those intentional imperfections in the 3D data, teaching the computer to preserve human mistakes. That's why the 2019 Mazda 3 is widely considered as one of the most beautiful mainstream cars ever made. Number 13. Mazda uses an organ-type accelerator pedal, which is hinged at the bottom like a piano pedal instead of the standard suspended pedal that hangs from above. Why? Because Mazda figured out that a bottom-hinged pedal matches the natural pivot of your ankle, meaning your foot moves with the pedal instead of against it, which reduces leg fatigue on long drives and gives you more precise control over the throttle. It's one of those things you never notice until you drive a car that doesn't have it. Number 14. Newer Mazdas will let you know the exact time and date the tire pressures were last checked, which is honestly TMI. Like, why would I need to know that? Number 15. In the early 1930s, Mazda noticed that most deliveries were still being done by people pushing and carrying things by hand, so they decided to make a better alternative, and that's how the 1931 Mazda Go was born. This cute little tricycle became Mazda's first ever production vehicle. It was small, simple, and was powered by a half-liter air-cooled single-cylinder engine. Upon its release, the Mazda Go became a hit. In fact, it was so popular that it stayed in production for close to 30 years. And fun fact, it came with spare spark plugs. Number 16. The Mazda RX-7 had mechanical automatic windows. What are those? Well, it's a switch that would stay depressed while the window went down, and then would pop back up once it was done. Why wasn't it programmed like every other car? I have no idea, but it's very cool. Number 17. Mazda's headquarters basically became the Japanese government for a while. You see, during World War II, Mazda joined the war effort and started building gun equipment, aircraft engines, and war vehicles. But as you all know, in 1945, Hiroshima was nuked by America, and after the blast, the entire city was destroyed. But Mazda's headquarters was one of the few major buildings still standing, so they immediately offered it to the government to help out. But they didn't stop there. They also offered their remaining fleet of Mazda Go's to help rebuild the city and transport people to hospitals after pulling them out of collapsed buildings. But do you know what was the craziest part? Mazda kept paying their workers even though they weren't making money. To this day, Mazda is still praised in Japan for preventing complete economic collapse. Their headquarters is still operational, and the Mazda Go is still remembered for helping rebuild Hiroshima. Number 18. Have you noticed that road trips are easier in some cars and harder in others? Well, in 2016, Mazda did, and they decided to get to the bottom of it by building a super expensive driver fatigue rig, which they used to measure every twitch and muscle from eye movements to butt clenches. And after testing, they realized that stiffing up your body is what gets you tired. So they decided to fix that using their new system, G-vectoring control, which uses torque vectoring to make the car smoother by eliminating micro-adjustments in the steering. Now, when GVC came out, journalists initially criticized Mazda because they said it didn't make any difference, So Mazda said, okay, drive this one that doesn't have it. And the journalists were all amazed, because not only was the car less predictable, it also felt looser and was way more tiring to drive. That's when they understood the genius of GVC. You're not supposed to notice it working. You're just supposed to arrive at your destination and think, that wasn't bad at all. Number 19. Mazda has engineers that have one very specific job: weighing bolts. Like, their entire job is to put bolts on a scale and then make them lighter without losing strength, because those few grams matter. Number 20. The Miata is the world's best-selling sports car ever, with 1.2 million units sold since its debut in 1989. Number 21. The correct way to say Mazda is Matsuda. And yes, I know I just pronounced it wrong while explaining the correct pronunciation, but relax, this is on brand for us. Anyways, have you ever wondered what's the meaning behind the name Mazda? Well, it actually has two meanings. It's both a reference to Ahura Mazda, the Kurdish Zoroastrian god of light, intelligence, and wisdom, and a nod to their president, Jujiro Matsuda, since Matsuda is literally how Mazda is pronounced in Japanese. You mad? Number 22. When Mazda finally managed to get the rotary working, they ran into a problem. They couldn't test them at high speeds for long periods of time because Japan's roads were narrow and there were too many cops around. But since this was the 60s and safety wasn't really a big issue, they shipped their prototypes to Germany and hauled ass down the Autobahn, while people commuted to work. Imagine seeing a Japanese rotary screaming past you on the highway before the word brap was invented. I love how crazy everyone was back then. Number 23. You know the chassis codes we use for Mazdas like NA, NB, FC, and FD? Well, those codes were used internally by Mazda and were never meant to be used by the public. But the fans were so nerdy that they found them out anyways by looking at the VIN. You see, Mazda's VINs start with the letters JM1, which is their world manufacturer identifier, and positions 4 and 5 of the VIN contain the chassis code. So for example, if you look at an FD RX-7's VIN, you'll see JM1FD somewhere in there. Same goes for the Miata. The NA's VIN has JM1NA, the NB has JM1NB, and so on. And once enthusiasts figured this out, they started using these internal codes to differentiate between generations, and now everyone uses them, even though Mazda never officially marketed their cars with those designations. Number 24. Mazda's infotainment screens are button-operated because Mazda believes touchscreens are not safe and they distract drivers, which is something that Doug DeMuro really disagrees with, and he mentions it in every single video that he makes, and I absolutely love it. Number 25. In the 80s, Mazda decided they wanted to prove to everyone that the rotary wasn't just some quirky Japanese experiment. And what better place to do that than in the 24 Hours of Le Mans, the most brutal endurance race on Earth. So in 1981, Mazda showed up with their rotary-powered cars only to get their asses handed to them. Like they weren't even close to winning. But instead of giving up like anyone else would, Mazda just kept coming back year after year, getting beat down every single time. That's until 1990, when someone at Mazda was like, wait a minute, we've been treating our rotary engine like a normal piston engine. What the hell are we doing? The engine's only point is that it can rev forever. So they went back to the drawing board and built the 787B for the 1991 season. And under the hood of this orange and green monster was the R26B, a naturally aspirated 4-rotor that made 700 horsepower at 9,000 RPM. Now what made this engine great wasn't just the power, it was the fact that it was stupid simple compared to the competition. No turbochargers to overheat, and no complicated valve trains to break. It was just a spinning Dorito that refused to die. And it was loud, very loud. With that said, the 787B wasn't actually all that fast. In fact, it was slower than the competition. But that wasn't a problem, because Mazda wasn't trying to be the fastest, they were trying to be the last one standing, which was a very bold strategy, because the 1991 season was Mazda's last chance at a victory. since the new rules introduced for the 1992 season basically made Mazda's rotaries illegal. So it was literally now or never. And to everyone's surprise but Mazda's, when race day came, the 787B just started doing its thing, lap after lap after lap, at the exact same pace. Never pushing too hard, never backing off. Just this perfectly consistent orange and green blur that wouldn't shut up or slow down. Meanwhile, the faster cars started having problems. Engines overheating, gearboxes exploding, and electronics failing. One by one, Mazda's competitors started retiring. By morning, the 787B was in the lead. And that's when the engineers started freaking out. Not because the car was having problems. No, the car was running perfectly. They were actually freaking out because they were worried about Johnny Herbert, the British driver who had been pushing this car for hours. Herbert was exhausted, dehydrated, and in serious pain. And to make things worse, the team asked him to do a double shift to the finish, because they didn't want to do a pit stop when victory was so close. So Herbert said yes and just suffered through it to the end. After crossing the finish line, he collapsed the moment he got out of the car due to pure exhaustion, and he had to be sent to the hospital, making Johnny Herbert the only Le Mans winner in history to miss his own podium celebration. But that wasn't the only first. Mazda became the first Japanese manufacturer to win Le Mans, and the 787B became the first and only rotary-powered car to ever win, making this the ultimate mic drop moment. Number 26. If you turn your Mazda off while it's in drive or reverse, the car will automatically engage park. But unlike Ford and their ghost knobs, Mazda's shifters don't physically go back to park, which means you have to move the lever into park even though it is in park before putting it in drive. Number 27. You know how the Miata looks happy all the time? Well, that's because Mazda designed it to look like that, by giving it an actual smiley mouth and cute little eyes. Also, don't forget about the dimples. Number 28. If you press the lock button on your Mazda's key 4 times and hold it down on the 5th, your key will go on standby mode, which is useful if you don't want your signal to be stolen or if you don't want your second key's battery to run out. Number 29. In the late 2000s, Mazda had to issue the weirdest and most necessary recall ever, because Mazdas built between 2009 and 2010 had a spider problem. And not the cute jumping kind, the gross-looking yellow kind. You see, all cars have a vapor release system in their fuel tanks, and so did Mazda. But the system they used was very exposed, and it attracted yellow sac spiders that love the smell of gasoline. And with time, they would set up their webs inside the release hose, blocking it and deforming the fuel tank, causing their cars to break down or sometimes even catch on fire. So obviously, Mazda took swift action and recalled those cars in 2010. But to everyone's surprise, the spiders came back, and Mazda had to recall them again in 2011, finally fixing this weird, creepy, disgusting issue. I don't like spiders. Number 30. Mazda's cars will turn off all auxiliary power when you shut the car off, meaning the infotainment will shut down before you even open the door. But don't worry, if you want to stay in your car and jam to some music, you can do that. You just have to hold down the button on the shifter as you shut the car off. Number 31. The Mazda RX-8 is a 4-door that looks like a 2-door, or a 2-door that behaves like a 4-door. It's very weird, and it's basically the worst of 2 worlds, which makes sense when you realize it wasn't meant to have 4 doors. You see, during the RX-8's development, the engineers realized that the car needed to be more practical and easier to live with than the RX-7, because this was the early 2000s and people were becoming more responsible. So they decided to give it 4 doors, which was a problem, because to give the RX-8 2 extra doors, Mazda would have to put in a B-pillar, disturbing its weight balance, which is a big no-no in Mazda's books. So they scrapped that idea and decided to go with half doors, because that way they wouldn't need a B-pillar and they wouldn't need to lengthen the wheelbase. Now, when the RX-8 did finally come out in 2003, the reviewers were all confused because they didn't know how to categorize it. In fact, Mazda engineers openly admitted that they knew they had to explain it every time they showed the car because they knew people wouldn't know how many doors it had. But nonetheless, that didn't stop the RX-8 from outselling the FD RX-7 and keeping the rotary alive until 2012. Number 32. Unlike these woke brands, Mazda isn't too big on all-electric vehicles, and they don't believe in long-range EVs. That's why their only EV, the ever-so-quirky MX-30, only has 100 miles of range. But ironically, Mazda had such a hard time selling it due to its range that they built a special program for it, where they would loan you one of their gas-powered cars 10 days a year for long road trips free of charge. It's like cutting your own arm off and putting a Band-Aid on it. And yes, that's why Mazda only builds hybrids nowadays. Number 33. Miata means reward in Old High German. Number 34. Mazda believes that opening and closing a car's door is like shaking its hand, and since handshakes offer the best first impression, their engineers had the perfect excuse to obsess over the sound the door made as it closed, and they managed to create a signature thud by adjusting the steel thickness of the door, playing around with the density of the rubber seals, and positioning the latches in a specific way. Now, why does creating a thud take so much work? Well, because Mazda refuses to add weight by adding sound insulation. I can't tell if they have too much time on their hands or if they're just passionate. Number 35. When CVTs became popular, Mazda decided to experiment with them to see if they're actually any good. So they told their engineers to test fit one of their cars with a CVT and provide their feedback. After their test session, the engineers went back to the management and they all said the same thing. It feels wrong. So Mazda said, okay, we'll drop it. And that's why Mazda doesn't use CVTs. Number 36. Every one of Mazda's USB ports must survive thousands of insertions with upward pressure before they go on their cars, because Mazda knows their owners will abuse those ports, and they design them accordingly. Number 37. This is the Mazda Speed 3, and it's a manual-only 263 horsepower hot hatch that's both practical and fast. But there's something about this car that genuinely pisses me off. Mazda cared enough to give it a lock button on the tailgate, so when you're grabbing stuff from the back you can lock it with a simple button press, but they didn't care enough to give it a temperature gauge. Seriously, this turbocharged 2.3-liter performance car that's literally built to be driven hard doesn't have a damn temp gauge. What were they thinking? Number 38. In the late 80s, Toyota, Nissan, and Honda launched their luxury brands Lexus, Infiniti, and Acura. Feeling a bit left out, Mazda decided to do the same, but a bit differently.
Same, but different.
Because they didn't just launch one brand, they launched 3: Unos, Affini, and AutoZam. The idea was, with 3 brands, Mazda could look larger than the sun itself. But since most of their cars were just rebadged Mazdas, their fanbase didn't expand, it got divided. As a result, Mazda's bubble-era brands disappeared quietly by the mid-90s when the Japanese economy collapsed. With that said, they did make a couple of cool cars, like the Gullwing mid-engine AZ1 and the V12 ultra-luxury Amati, which was production-ready but never made it into production, since launching that brand took longer than expected. And yes, they were planning to launch a 4th brand at that point. Number 39. The MX-5 originally came in 3 colors, red, white, and blue. But the factory hardtop only came in red, because apparently having it in 3 colors was just too expensive, meaning you couldn't get a color-matching hardtop if you didn't get a red car. With that said, they did start color matching later on. Number 40. In the 80s, Mazda's European team started begging them to go into the WRC because they believed Mazda needed to be present at that sport. And after a lot of arguing, Mazda reluctantly agreed, and they told them point blank, go, don't embarrass us, and don't spend too much money. Armed with an okay mindset, they entered Group A in 1986. But as it turned out, convincing Mazda was the easy part, because the other teams had way too much money, and Mazda, with their tiny 1.6-liter turbocharged 323, were getting their asses handed to them. That's when reality set in. They weren't going to win. So when the season ended, they decided to regroup and hatch a plan to make the execs happy, because if they kept on losing, their funding would be cut. After some brainstorming, they came up with a perfect plan. They were going to focus on one stage, Sweden. You see, the team knew that it would be impossible to beat out their competition because their cars were simply too good. But they could beat them on the snow, because those fast cars were heavy, and heavy cars didn't perform well on the snow, since technology and speed don't matter when you have no grip. And sure enough, when Rally Sweden rolled around in the 1987 season, the little 323 was a monster. It was light, and it was able to use all of its 250 horses, securing the win with ease and becoming the first Japanese automaker to win at Rally Sweden, proving that money doesn't mean everything. By the way, their team managed to win again in 1989 just to show it wasn't luck. Number 41. The RX-7 has a real-life danger to manifold alert, because during the development of the FD RX-7, Mazda's engineers couldn't figure out how to stop the car from getting heat-soaked, because as it turns out, putting twin turbos on a rotary and jamming it into a small engine bay isn't the smartest thing in the world. Anyways, since they couldn't figure out how to fix that issue, they installed a light that would come on when the exhaust got too hot, to let you know when you should ease off the gas pedal. Number 42. Mazda's shifters are tested with gloves, sweaty hands, and dry hands separately. And if the feel changes too much between them, they scrap the design and go back to the drawing board. Number 43. For the longest time, Mazda's tagline was Zoom Zoom, because they wanted their owners to feel the same type of pure joy kids feel when they play with a car and go Zoom Zoom, which is very wholesome and on brand for Mazda. It's no wonder they promoted that tagline so much and even named a stadium after it. But sadly, they dropped that tagline in 2015 and replaced it with Driving Matters. Number 44. The new MX-5 has a magnification feature for the engine temp, so you can really monitor your temps. Number 45. Mazda once ran an ad that was unwatchable, and they did that intentionally. You see, in 1994, Mazda aired this commercial for the all-new 323 in the UK, and in the ad, they flashed the car's information on screen for a split second, meaning you had to record it on your VCR and play it back in slow motion to be able to read it. Now here's the genius part. Mazda knew nobody was going to do all that for nothing. So at the end of the commercial, they told viewers they can win that car. And as you could imagine, people started recording it so they could enter the competition that was hidden inside the flashcards, making this the first interactive ad in history. Number 46. Mazda performs clunk tests on their suspension parts to eliminate road noise. What's a clunk test? It's when you hit a metal part with a plastic hammer. Seriously, Mazda still uses this technique while others have moved on to sensors and computers, because sensors usually misidentify sounds and downplay how annoying they actually are. That's why a guy with a hammer is actually more effective. Number 47. The FB RX-7 came with individual controls for the sound adjustments, and even a joystick that allowed you to choose which speaker the sound came from. I guess people in the 80s really cared about the way their music sounded. Number 48. The fastest production car Mazda has ever built is the 2002 RX-7 Spirit R, which had a 1.3-liter twin rotor that made over 300 horsepower and a top speed of 170 miles per hour. And before you say it, no, the Mazda 3 Turbo isn't faster, neither is the RX-8. Number 49. Just like Wranglers, Miatas have their own greeting, and it's so freaking cute. I would buy one just to get waved at. Number 50. In the late 70s, Mazda was really struggling and they were on the brink of bankruptcy. And right as they got desperate, Ford stepped in and offered a lifeline by buying 25% of Mazda in 1979, which was great. Mazda and Ford worked well together and they shared their platforms. In fact, things were going so well that Ford decided to increase their share to 33% in 1995. But that's when things started to go downhill, because Ford wanted Mazda to basically become Mercury Japan, erasing Mazda's whole identity with cost-cutting and badge engineering, which is against what Mazda stood for. But instead of laying there and accepting it, Mazda kept doing things their way, by keeping their R&D department fiercely independent and not allowing Ford to tamper with their design language. They also kept on prioritizing handling over cost against Ford's wishes. Now this would have gone on forever, and they would have had to give in eventually. But in 2008, they were saved when the financial crisis happened, because it forced Ford to sell back Mazda's shares to stay afloat. Number 51. You can turn on tunnel mode in your Mazda's navigation so the car could tell you when you've entered a tunnel. But here's some friendly advice. If you need a screen to tell you when you're in a tunnel, you should probably take your eyes off the screen and look at the road. Number 52. The rotary engine almost died in the 90s, and it would have if it wasn't for a group of Mazda engineers and an MX-5. You see, when Ford started calling the shots at Mazda in 1996, they looked at their upcoming rotary plans and said, nope, we're not funding any of it. But a small group of engineers refused to accept that, and they began working on a new rotary project in secret by stealing a beat-up MX-5 that was being used for training and working on it after hours at a maintenance area that no one paid attention to. And they did quite a lot of work. They stretched the chassis, shoved a prototype rotary engine in it, did test runs late at night, and even built parts themselves because they couldn't call suppliers without blowing their cover. Now, since the engineers didn't have time to make any cosmetic improvements, the car looked horrendous, and it was so ugly that it was nicknamed the Gokiburi-ka, which translates to cockroach car. But sadly, we don't have any images of it since it was a super secret project. Anyways, when the car was finished, they didn't file a report or submit a proposal. They took it straight to management so they could drive it themselves. And apparently, it was really good because they greenlit the project. Eventually, that cockroach became the RX-8, and the rest is history. Number 53. Mazda's most iconic color is their Soul Red paint, which looks great. But just like everything else they do, it's unnecessarily complicated. Now you might ask, how complicated could paint be? Well, listen to this. Mazda's red paint is made of 3 layers. The first one is a reflective layer that is packed with ultra-fine aluminum flakes, creating an internal glow instead of surface shine. The second layer is the translucent red color layer, which allows light to pass through and bounce off the flakes before coming back out, giving it a liquid blood depth effect. And the third layer is the high-clarity clear coat, which had to be extremely thin to not disturb the shine, while also being very durable to protect the paint. Now, the goal of this technique, which is derived from the Japanese urushi lacquer craft and is called takuminuri, isn't to make the car look shiny, it's to make it look alive. That's why it looks like dark wine in shadows, glowing crimson in sunlight, and almost black at night. Number 54. Mazda once put an engine in a suitcase. Seriously! In 1991, the engineers at Mazda were bored. So naturally, as one does when they're bored, they took a suitcase, put in a 1.7 horsepower 33cc 2-stroke from a weed whacker, which was probably not the only thing that whacked weed at Mazda, and made it foldable. Now initially, they didn't advertise their carry-on car. They just had fun with it, passing it around from one dealer to another. But later, when one of their executives was photographed driving it to work in New York, yes, that actually happened, they decided to let people in on their weird fun inside joke by taking it to a motor show. Number 55. Mazda's leather steering wheels are all hand-stitched using a traditional Japanese cross-stitching technique called sashiko, which translates to little stabs in Japanese, and it allows for better grip when you're turning. Now, this is worth mentioning because hand-stitching is unheard of at their price point, since it takes a lot of time and is very expensive. So why do they do it? Because Mazda believes the steering wheel is the most important part of the car, and if opening its door is like shaking its hand, then turning its steering wheel is like laying in bed with it. Number 56. The Mazda 3 will draw a red line for you on the gauge cluster when you go over the speed limit to let you know you should slow down. Number 57. This is a sway bar, and it connects the right wheels of the car to the left, stopping it from having too much body roll in the corners. That's why it's also referred to as an anti-roll bar. Now Mazda, unlike other brands, believes that sway bars are a cop-out and that they're used wrong, since they should fine-tune balance and not compensate for bad suspension. That's why Mazda's engineers designed their suspensions to rely on bushings, dampers, and suspension geometry before the sway bar is even added, allowing their cars to corner flat while being soft and comfortable when you're driving normally. Number 58. Ikuo Maeda, the chief designer of Mazda and the father of the RX-8, bought an RX-7 as his first car, not knowing that his father, Matasaburo Maeda, who was also the chief designer at Mazda, was the one who designed it. meaning the RX-7 and its successor, the RX-8, was a father-son project. This is too wholesome. Number 59. The ever-so-quirky Mazda MX-30 had cork in the interior instead of wood, as a nod to Mazda's cork-making days. Number 60. When Mazda started developing the third-generation Mazda 6, they decided to approach it differently by using the gram strategy, which is when you account for every single gram that goes into the car. And in true Mazda fashion, it turned into an obsession. They spent months redesigning the seat frames to use less sound deadening, they changed the hinges and threw away the hood struts, they shortened wires as much as possible even if it was by a couple of centimeters, and they made the paint and windshield thinner. But we're not done there. The door seals were designed to be all-in-one and lighter. The AC ducts, armrest, and trim pieces were shaved down. The suspension parts were hollowed out where they could, but only after they were stress-tested using expensive machines, of course. And they even made the cup holders lighter. Because during their OCD trip, they figured out that every brand, including them, was overbuilding them. And the result? The Mazda 6 weighed 3,200 pounds fully spec'd out, while their competitor, the Camry, weighed 300 pounds more. That's why the Mazda 6 is slightly faster and more economical than the Camry, while being safer and more rigid. But to be fair, the difference is minimal. I don't want to say they did it for nothing, but... Number 61. Okay, so you've probably seen this badge on Mazdas, and you probably have an idea of what it means. But contrary to what most of you think, SkyActiv isn't just about the engine, it's about the whole car. I'll explain. In the early 2000s, every brand was downsizing and turbocharging their engines. But Mazda didn't believe in that strategy, because they thought it was a cop-out and it would make their cars too heavy, expensive, and unreliable. So instead, they decided to re-engineer the whole car as one system by building their chassis, body structures, transmissions, suspension, and engines in a way that would make them complement one another. And thus, SkyActiv was born. Now, of course, their engines were the main stars, because Mazda somehow managed to make naturally aspirated engines that were powerful, lightweight, and reliable, using high compression ratios, which was something that most engineers at that time said was impossible, because back then, engines with high compression ratios tore themselves apart. But Mazda proved them wrong, and did it in secret. Why? Well, because Mazda was owned by Ford at the time, and they wanted to keep SkyActiv for themselves as an exit strategy, since they knew they had to kick Ford out somehow. Later, when Mazda became independent again, they launched SkyActiv in 2011. Number 62. In 2016, Mazda built the 1 millionth Miata, which was a huge milestone, especially for a sports car. But instead of locking it in a museum like every other automaker, they decided to do something different. They took it worldwide to as many events and meets as they could. They even gave people a Sharpie and told them to sign it. But they didn't stop there. They also let their biggest fans drive it around to make it even more special, turning their most special car into a thank you letter for their fans. Anyways, after finishing its tour, the car, covered in names and signatures, was sent to their Hiroshima museum to be put on display. Number 63. Mazdas with pop-up headlights all came with a button that allowed you to pop them open without turning the headlights on. But it wasn't a flex or to be cute like some of you might think. It was actually so you could leave them up when it got too cold so they wouldn't be frozen shut. Number 64. Mazda's master builders are called Takumi, which means master craftsman in Japanese, and getting that title isn't an easy job. To be called Takumi at Mazda, you need to have 20 years of experience. But it's not just about time. You also need to perfect your craft and go through their test. What's their test? Well, they strap 41 light markers on you and monitor your every move to see how effectively and efficiently you use your muscles. Number 65. The very cool and obscure 1992 MX-3 has the teeniest V6 ever put in a production car. Its 1.8-liter V6 made a respectable 130 horsepower and 117 pound-feet of torque while getting 21 miles per gallon. And it genuinely sounds great. Number 66. This is one of the coolest cars Mazda has ever built. It's called the Furai. Or was called, I'll explain in a bit. In 2008, Mazda built this 470 horsepower, all-carbon supercar that weighed less than 1,500 pounds as a tribute to the 787B. It was gorgeous, it was nimble, and it was fast as hell. But suddenly, the car disappeared, and Mazda didn't talk about it again. Which was odd, because the Furai was their pride and joy. Later in 2013, we found out why. Because as it turns out, the car caught fire and burned down during an episode of Top Gear 5 years earlier. Now, why did Top Gear hide it for 5 years? Because Mazda asked them to, and Top Gear agreed out of respect. There was no wrongdoing or negligence on anyone's part. And as Mazda put it, race cars sometimes burn down, which is such a shame, especially because Mazda refused to make another one. Number 67. In 2017, Toyota was eyeing Mazda's designs and super sexy looking cars, while Mazda was drooling for Toyota's hybrid technology. So naturally, they decided to get in bed and become the best of friends, with benefits. You see, as part of their alliance, Toyota acquired 5% of Mazda, while Mazda acquired 0.25%, and they moved in together into their Alabama factory in 2021. That's why nowadays Toyotas look great, while Mazda makes reliable hybrid cars. Number 68. Disclaimer: the following story is a perfect representation of Mazda's OCD-having engineers. Okay, let's begin. Every Mazda body panel starts as a flat sheet of steel that gets stamped into shape by a giant press, and inside that press is a metal mold called a die. Now, the surface of that die has to be absolutely flawless, because any tiny imperfection will show up on the car as a weird reflection or a dip in the paint. So Mazda's Takumi finished these dies by hand using grinding stones, which are basically ultra-precise abrasive tools that let them shave metal down to insane tolerances. And here's where it gets very Mazda. When their engineers started doing this process, they tested over 12,000 grinding stones from other manufacturers, but they rejected all of them because they weren't up to Mazda's standards. So they did the next best thing. They made their own, and their stones were so precise that they were able to sculpt metal to 1/20th the width of a human hair. Meaning Mazda invented a tool because the tools that existed weren't good enough. Number 69. Based on Mazda's research, relying on finger strength when you open your door is uncomfortable, and it can put strain on your wrist. That's why Mazda's door handles are designed to pull out in a smooth arc, so you would use your entire hand and minimize wrist strain. Number 70. In 1992, Racing Beat, an American tuning company, decided to beat the world record for the sea-blown modified sports class at the Bonneville Salt Flats. And they decided to do that with a 760 horsepower triple rotor RX-7. And when they got to the event and started their run, everything was going great. The car, which was piloted by Jim Mederer, reached 220 miles per hour with ease. But that's when things took a turn for the worse. Because right as they were about to break the record, the car hit a bump, caught flight, and slid on its roof for what felt like forever. But incredibly, Jim walked out unharmed. Now, any sane person wouldn't look at that and say, yeah, we need more power. But Jim did. And he came back in 1995 with a black-on-black 900 horsepower RX-7 and managed to beat the world record by going 242 miles per hour, which is a record that still stands today because that class was retired shortly after. What big cojones does this guy have? Number 71. In 2019, Mazda started getting complaints of wheel lugs falling off their Mazda 3s. After investigation, it turned out that Mazda didn't tighten them enough at the factory. So immediately, they recalled those cars. And owners had to bring their cars in so some guy with a wrench could tighten the nuts in the parking lot. And the crazy part is, they did it for free. Wow. Number 72. Imagine walking into a dealership and talking to the salesman who actually built the car you're looking at. Sounds absurd, doesn't it? Well, that was the case for some lucky buyers in the late 70s. Because when Mazda realized they had to let some of their staff go due to financial issues, they decided to relocate them instead. And they sent 5,000 engineers, designers, and factory workers to their dealerships in Japan to sell cars because they refused to let them go. Later, when Mazda recovered, they brought them back to their original positions. Number 73. Mazda actually recorded 100 different variations of exhaust notes for the NA Miata because they believed the Roadster needed to sound just right. That's why the NA Miata sounds so menacing. Number 74. This is Naoko Nishimoto, and she's awesome because not only did she daily drive an FD RX-7, she also gave it away to Mazda completely for free. You see, in 1999, this lovable, cute old lady was watching Initial D with her son. That's when she saw the RX-7 and immediately fell in love with it. In fact, she loved it so much that she bought a brand new one the day after. And for the next 25 years, she proceeded to take meticulous care of her baby, keeping it brand new. But later when she turned 80, she decided to give up her license, which meant giving up the car as well. So, she went on a local Nagasaki news channel and told them she was looking for someone to take it. Someone she knew would appreciate and take good care of it. The story went viral shortly after, and over 400 people reached out wanting to buy it. But as it turns out, a Mazda engineer happened to be watching the broadcast, and he told the PR team, "You guys need to reach out to this woman." So Mazda sent her an email, and when she read it, she said it was filled with so much passion and sincerity that it seemed to shine. That's when she decided to give them the car. Not sell it, give it. Seeing how special this was, Mazda decided to make it even more special by setting up a handover ceremony at the same dealership she bought the car from 25 years prior. They gave her flowers, a personal letter from Mazda's CEO, her own license plate, and original sketches from the RX-7's development. And when the ceremony was over, Naoko said, "I'm saying farewell to a dear friend, but that's okay, because thanks to this old friend, I've made many more new friends." God, I love her. Number 75. Mazda tests window switches thousands of times to measure thumb fatigue. And if the tester's thumb feels tired after repeated use, the switch gets redesigned. Number 76. For some reason, the RX-8 sun visor has holes, and it lets in sunlight, meaning the RX-8 sun visor has one job, and it fails at it. Don't ask me why it's like that because I have no idea. Number 77. Mazda used to sell a rebadged Explorer called the Navajo in 1990, and to those of you with a keen eye, you might have noticed that it's a two-door, which is very cool. But contrary to what you might believe, Mazda didn't choose the two-door layout for its cool factor. They chose it because they had to. Because when Ford announced that they will share the Explorer with Mazda, their dealers threw a hissy fit and lobbied Ford not to, since it would compete with the Explorer, which was selling like hotcakes back then. So, to make the dealers happy, Ford decided to keep the four-door version for themselves and give Mazda this weird two-door version, which was like a death sentence for Mazda. Because while Ford was selling over 300,000 units a year, Mazda couldn't sell more than 10,000. In fact, the Navajo's sales were so bad that when the Explorer's demand grew even bigger, Ford just stopped building the Navajo because they needed to allocate that part of the production line to build more Explorers to meet the growing demand. And that's why the Navajo was discontinued in 1994. Number 78. Most Mazdas with 2.5-liter four-cylinder engines have cylinder deactivation, meaning they can run on two cylinders when there isn't too much load. Number 79. The NA Miata came with a textured coating on its bottom half to protect it from stone chips, because Mazda knew a car that low was always going to lose that fight with the road. Number 80. After years of working hard and saving up, a Japanese college student managed to buy an FC RX-7. But soon after, Japan got hit by a typhoon, and his car was flooded. So he took it to a Mazda dealership to get it fixed, but the insurance company refused to pay for it, which broke his heart because he couldn't afford to fix it himself. Seeing how devastating this was for that young man, the techs at the dealership decided to take matters into their own hands by convincing the higher-ups to let them work on it after hours, and they managed to get the car fixed at little to no cost. Now, we don't know who the kid was, and we have no pictures of the car, because Mazda didn't document it because they didn't do it for the press. They did it to be nice. Number 81. Dr. Kenichi Yamamoto, the father of Mazda's rotaries, was so passionate about the engine that he often called it his child. In fact, he was so proud of it that he would regularly visit dealerships asking how his child was doing, and would write down customer complaints personally. It's no surprise that Yamamoto later became Mazda's president. Number 82. Mazda has a winter proving ground in Hokkaido, where they test cars in -25-degree weather. But here's the thing, the test courses aren't even theirs. They're public roads that townspeople use most of the year, and they only become Mazda's when winter hits. And the reason Mazda is even there is because 40 years ago, the mayor of this tiny town called Kenbuchi, who was a massive Mazda fan, basically invited them to come slide around on his roads. So now every winter, over 1,000 engineers pack up their lives and relocate to this middle-of-nowhere forest town for months, just to test all-wheel drive systems, brakes, and whether their doors can even open when it's that cold. And fun fact, their iActive all-wheel drive system was developed here. And another fun fact, the only security during that time is one old man at a gate. Because the real thing keeping spy photographers out isn't fences or cameras, it's bears. Now what does Mazda do for the town in return? They throw fun parties every year when the summer comes. This sounds like a fairy tale. Number 83. Mazda has their own racing series called Spec Miata, and it's considered as one of the most competitive forms of racing because all the cars are identical down to the last bolt. And it's not uncommon to see fields of 60, 70, or even 80 cars racing bumper to bumper, with finishes separated by inches. And since everyone's driving the exact same car with the exact same power and setup, the only thing separating first place from last place is pure driver skill. That's why so many professional racers say that winning in Spec Miata is harder than racing cars with 10 times the horsepower. Number 84. The 1992 Mazda 929 had a solar-powered ventilation system, which pushed out hot air during summer. Number 85. It took Mazda a whole year to come up with a word to describe their designs. I wish I was joking. You see, back in 2010, Mazda's new head of design, Ikuo Maeda, took over, and he basically looked at the entire Mazda lineup and said, "Nope, we're starting over." Because he wanted every Mazda to look like it was alive, like an animal frozen in the instant right before it pounces, when you can feel their energy without any movement. And he used 3 words to describe what he meant: speed, tension, and allure. But he didn't want to just call it Mazda design or some boring corporate thing. He wanted one word that could embody the spirit of what they were trying to do, and it took his team almost an entire year to find it: Kodo, which translates to heartbeat in Japanese. And yes, they refused to talk about their new designs for a whole year until they found the perfect word. Number 86. The FD RX-7 has many cool design cues, from its hidden door handles that don't disturb the car's lines, to its knee pads that help the driver brace themselves during corners. But for some reason, Mazda thought that the cigarette lighter was so important that they placed it where the ignition would be. It's just very odd. Number 87. In the 90s, street racing was all the rage in Japan, and the Japanese police were being left in the dust. That's when they decided to get a performance car of their own to catch up to criminals. And in their search, they came to the conclusion that the RX-7 was the perfect choice. Why? Well, for 2 reasons actually. First, the RX-7 was menacing, and it was the perfect psychological choice to deter people from running. And second, the RX-7 was rev-happy, meaning it loved being driven hard non-stop for long periods of time, which made it a perfect cop car. And that's how the Japanese police got their hands on a JDM legend. Number 88. This is the Mazda Ripu, and this 110 horsepower cute little thing is the only rotary-powered truck ever made, which is evident by the big rotary power sticker on the back. By the way, its name is short for rotary engine pickup. Number 89. The trunk and fuel door controls on NA and NB Miatas were located inside the glove box, which could be locked, so you could leave the top down without worrying about someone stealing from you. And not only that, Mazda also sold radio covers, which were plastic trim pieces that covered your radio, making you seem like a peasant to thieves. Number 90. Mazda still offers manuals on many of their cars, and they have publicly stated that they will keep selling them as long as there's even the slightest demand for it. Now, the reason why Mazda refuses to let the manual die isn't just because of their fans, it's also because of their engineers. Because to this day, they use manuals in their development process to tune their cars, since manuals offer the best feedback and makes the driver feel connected to the car. Number 91. Kia started life by building rebadged Mazdas in 1974. Number 92. Mazda has a factory that only has 12 workers. Seriously, they have a tiny factory in the Japanese countryside called Miyoshi, and its only purpose is to build engine parts for classic Mazdas. Their 12 employees are each tasked with building one engine entirely by hand, and they do it using old machines from Mazda's Hiroshima factory, which were revamped and given a second life at this establishment. This place is basically a retirement home for production lines, and nobody would notice if Mazda shut this place down tomorrow. But they don't, because somewhere out there, someone's still daily driving a 30-year-old Mazda, and Mazda wants to make sure they never have to stop. Number 93. The CX-5 has a smart cargo cover that you can put things in. Now that would be really cool and useful if it didn't cost $325, which is absurd. Number 94. You know how all ads are in your face, loud, and obnoxious? Well, Mazda for some reason thought it would be smart to go the absolute opposite direction by making the 1994 Zeto 6's ad so quiet that you had to put your TV at max volume to hear it. Why? Just to be different. Yeah, maybe being different isn't always the best thing. Number 95. Mazda has an ancient Japanese philosophy baked into every single car they make, and it's called Jinba Itai, which translates to horse and rider as one. And it dates back to 300 AD, when Japan had this insane sport called Yabusame, where archers would ride horses at full speed and shoot their targets with a bow and arrow while they had both their hands on the bow, forcing them to steer their horse at full gallop with their knees, core, and tiny shifts in their body weight. Now, Mazda looked at that and said, yeah, that's how driving should feel. The car should know what you want before you even finish thinking it. So they designed their cars to do just that. And when they were initially working on that design language, one of their chassis engineers described the moment he knew they nailed it by saying, "I was driving one day and just stopped feeling the car entirely. It wasn't fast, it wasn't loud, it just disappeared. And that's when I knew this was it." Spending years engineering something so you don't notice it is what makes Mazda, Mazda. Number 96. Since the Mazda CX-90 is a family car and will probably have child seats in it, Mazda designed its rear doors to open 90 degrees for ease of access. Many owners don't think about it when they buy it, but they all thank Mazda the very first time they use it. Number 97. When the era of the rotary came to an end, Mazda didn't lock all their research in a vault. Instead, they collaborated with universities and released full research papers so people could make sense of the rotary and hopefully bring it back someday. They even supplied engines and data for academic researchers. Number 98. Every single button on the RX-8 makes a beep. Every single one. I don't know why or how useful that is, but it exists. Number 99. Mazda made official Zoom Zoom mixtapes for their cars in the early 2000s because they wanted you to enjoy it the way they made it, which is peak Mazda. Number 100. On Mazdas, you can link your seats with the AC system, meaning it will turn on the heating or cooling on the seats based on the temperature of the cabin. Number 101. The 1983 Mazda 626 had swing vents. Why don't new cars have this? Like, it's a genuinely cool and useful feature. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a great day, and I'll see you on the next one. By the way, we see you, random counting guy.